For nearly a century, there was this rock-solid, minimalist consensus among historical scholars. They basically said, look, the account of millions of Israelites leaving Egypt, it's just a pious myth. They'd point out that there was absolutely zero physical evidence of millions of people wandering the desert. For them, it was an open and shut case. Or, so it seemed.
But what if the tools we were using to look for that evidence were just, well, too narrow? I mean, think about it. What happens when a whole new wave of multidisciplinary research, we're talking everything from high-tech X-ray scans of ancient lead to advanced hydrodynamic computer modeling, gets applied to this ancient narrative? Suddenly, that open and shut case turns into a really compelling cold case.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep to reassess the Exodus narrative. And we're not doing this through the lens of theology. Instead, we're looking strictly at the tangible, physical evidence. We're going to see exactly how recent discoveries are completely stunning the historical community and suggesting that the foundational memory of Israel's origins is actually rooted in real-world events.
All right, let's jump right in. Here's our investigative roadmap. We're going to cover evidence in the soil, the Levite connection, ancient writing on the wall, the physics of miracles, and finally, a living historical memory.
Let's start with Section 1, Evidence in the Soil.
So the search for the Israelites actually begins in the eastern Nile Delta at a site called Tel el-Daba. In ancient times, this was known as Avaris, and geographically, it perfectly matches the biblical land of Goshen. Decades of excavations there have revealed this incredibly vivid story hidden right in the layers of earth. When archaeologists dig down to a layer they call stratum G/4, they find this massive Semitic settlement. It even has a large villa with 12 pillars, which strongly points to highly favored Semitic officials living there. Sounds a lot like the biblical era of Joseph, right? But then, in the very next layer up, stratum G/1, the story completely flips. We see evidence of an abrupt abandonment and mass graves. And by the time we get to stratum D/2 in the New Kingdom period, the Semitic people living there are essentially laborers, explicitly tasked with mud brick production. It's a very clear, physical pattern, integration followed by sudden catastrophe and enslavement. Now, the truly crucial point is what researchers actually found inside those mass graves. They discovered a staggering 65% infant mortality rate, specifically for children under 18 months old. Let that sink in for a second. This kind of sudden demographic shock precisely mirrors the biblical descriptions of a state-mandated infanticide and unimaginably harsh labor conditions.
The chaotic scene left behind in that specific layer of earth tells a really grim story. Bodies were just thrown together into shallow pits. There was clearly no time for proper Egyptian burial practices. And archaeologists found absolutely zero grave goods left behind. Adding to this dark picture, the remains in these graves were disproportionately female, which perfectly aligns with the narrative of male babies being systematically targeted. Something massive, something devastating happened here. They caused the survivors to just pack up and abandon their homes en masse.
Moving on to Section 2, the Levite connection.
Now you might be wondering, if millions of people left Egypt, shouldn't there be way more widespread evidence across the Sinai Desert? Well, some scholars have proposed a really interesting theory. What if the group that actually left Egypt was much smaller? You see, Egyptian cultural influence wasn't spread evenly across all the early Israelites. It was heavily, almost exclusively concentrated in just one specific group, the Levite tribe. They, and really only they, carried Egyptian names like Moses, Phinehas, and Hophni. They were the ones who maintained strict Egyptian circumcision practices. Even the design of the tabernacle matches the exact architectural layout of Pharaoh Ramses II's battle tent. Meanwhile, the other tribes show almost a total lack of this Egyptian culture. So this strongly suggests that perhaps only the Levites were actually in Egypt, and they later brought these traditions to Canaan to share with the rest of the tribes.
And textual evidence actually backs this theory up beautifully. Think about the Song of Deborah and the Song of Miriam. These are widely considered the two oldest texts in the entire Bible. The Song of Deborah is set in Israel, it lists the tribes, but it noticeably leaves out the Levites. Why? Well, they likely just weren't there yet. Conversely, the Song of Miriam is set in Egypt during the Exodus, and it just refers to a people leaving. It never mentions the larger unified nation of Israel. It's a fascinating detail that perfectly points to a smaller, Levite-led Exodus.
All right, Section 3, Ancient Writing on the Wall.
For the longest time, a major argument against the Exodus was the claim that Moses couldn't possibly have written the Torah because, well, Hebrew literacy just didn't exist early enough. But recent epigraphic evidence, that's the study of ancient inscriptions, is completely turning that timeline upside down. As early as 1800 BCE, we're seeing a Proto-Semitic script at Wadi el-Hol in Egypt. By 1400 BCE, there's a name ring on the Berlin pedestal that scholars believe reads Israel, placing an entity called Israel in Canaan a full 2 centuries earlier than previously thought. And then, right around 1200 BCE, we have the incredibly fascinating Mount Ebal curse tablet.
Let's look a bit closer at those Wadi el-Hol inscriptions. A really stunning 2025 reanalysis confirmed that Semitic-speaking populations living in Egypt actually possessed a functional alphabet centuries before the purported Exodus. They essentially adapted complex Egyptian hieroglyphs into a simpler alphabet using the acrophonic principle. Basically, they'd use a picture of a house to represent the letter Bet and a picture of a fish for dag. It even exhibits distinct Hebrew-like syntax, like specific verb-object ordering. This proves the Israelites were part of a literate culture, fully capable of recording their own history.
And then we have the Mount Ebal lead tablet. This little 2 by 2 centimeter folded piece of lead is highly controversial and was found exactly where the Bible places Joshua's altar. Now, proponents of the tablet used high-resolution X-ray scans to look inside the folded lead, and they claim it holds 48 proto-alphabetic characters. They even say it contains the earliest known inscription of YHW, the Hebrew name for God, right in the land of Israel. Critics, on the other hand, push back fiercely. They argue that the researchers are just experiencing pareidolia, seeing patterns in random scratches that aren't really there. They suggest this profound discovery is literally just an ancient lead fishing sinker. The academic debate here is intense, and we're definitely not taking sides, but if the proponents are right, it places literate Israelites squarely in the heart of Canaan exactly at the time of the conquest.
Next up, Section 4, the physics of miracles.
Okay, so we have new evidence regarding the people and their language. But what about the miraculous events themselves? In a really fascinating twist, modern secular science is unintentionally validating the physical mechanics behind these ancient miracles. Take the parting of the sea, for example. Computer simulations run by Carl Drews at the National Center for Atmospheric Research focused on a very real coastal phenomenon called wind set-down. Their models showed that if a sustained 63-mile-per-hour east wind blew across the Lake of Tanis, it could literally push the water back. This would expose a 3 to 4 kilometer land bridge for roughly 4 hours, and then the water would rush back in as a catastrophic tidal bore. It's an entirely known physical phenomenon that perfectly matches the ancient text.
And it doesn't stop there. Modern ecology is even providing logical explanations for the 10 plagues. Scientists have proposed what they call a devastating ecological domino effect. It starts with something like a toxic algal bloom, specifically Oscillatoria rubescens, or maybe even volcanic ash from Santorini, which would turn the Nile blood red and completely deoxygenate the water. This lack of oxygen forces the frogs to flee to the land, where they die en masse. Then, all those rotting frogs cause disease-carrying insects like gnats and flies to multiply uncontrollably, spreading sickness. Eventually, a fungal outbreak in the damp grain supplies proves fatal. And because the firstborn sons traditionally got the first pick of the food, they were the first to be poisoned. It is a horrific, but entirely logical, ecological chain reaction.
Finally, Section 5, a living historical memory.
So, when we synthesize all of this, the dirt of Avaris, the Levite cultural markers, early alphabetic writing, and modern hydrodynamic models, what do we actually get? Well, as historians are starting to realize, the evidence for the Exodus isn't missing, it's just dispersed across archaeology, genetics, and physics. We even see this in modern ancient DNA studies, which have confirmed that Jews and Arabs today share a massive percentage of their DNA with ancient Canaanites, validating a long-term biological and cultural integration. The biblical Exodus might not be a single perfect moment captured like a photograph, with millions of people marching exactly 8 abreast. Instead, it is a meticulously constructed, living historical memory of a people breaking free from the house of bondage, rooted deeply in the tangible, material realities of the ancient Near East.
If you enjoyed this explainer, please hit the like button and subscribe to Sermon Academy for more insights into the intersection of faith, history, and science. And if you want to keep exploring fascinating topics like this and access our full library of deep dive resources, head over to sermonacademy.com. Your support allows us to continue bringing you the latest discoveries, so please consider making a donation at sermonacademy.com/donate. I want to leave you with this final thought. If a foundational story, one that shaped the morality and identity of an entire civilization, is built on historical fragments of real oppression, real environmental catastrophes, and a real escape, does that make the memory any less real? Or does it actually make it even more profound?